The day I watched another woman hang curtains in my bedroom window was the day something inside me changed forever. Standing across the street, I observed as she laughed, phone pressed to her ear, probably talking to my husband while she made herself comfortable in the home I'd spent 15 years building. The colonial blue house with the white trim that I'd chosen. The garden where I'd planted roses for our 10th anniversary. The porch swing where I used to read on Sunday mornings. All of it stolen from me with a signature on divorce papers I never saw coming, transferred to her name through some legal sleight of hand that David had orchestrated while I was visiting my dying mother in Arizona. A cruel magic trick. Now you have a home. Now you don't. But David had forgotten one critical detail in his rush to build a new life with Cassandra. One oversight that would eventually bring everything crashing down around them, literally. The land. The actual ground beneath that beautiful house belonged solely to me, through an inheritance clause my grandmother had insisted upon years before I even met David. Always keep something that's just yours. Grandma Rose had whispered to me on her deathbed. Men come and go, but land remains. I didn't understand the weight of her words until that moment, watching this stranger rearrange my life. I pulled out my phone and made a call to an old friend who worked for Brightpath Construction. It was time to remind everyone exactly whose ground they were standing on. David and I met in graduate school. He was studying business law while I was finishing my degree in architectural design. We were the perfect match on paper, both ambitious, both from good families, both dreaming of building something meaningful together. I fell for his confidence, his quick mind, and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. He fell for my creativity, my practicality, and as he told me on our wedding night, the way I made him feel like he could conquer the world. We're going to build an empire together, Eliza, he'd promised, kissing my forehead in the honeymoon suite of the hotel his parents had paid for. Just you wait and see. For the first decade, it seemed like we were on track. David climbed the ranks at his law firm, eventually making partner by 35. I established my own small architectural consulting business, taking projects that allowed me to work primarily from home while we tried to start a family. The children never came, but our careers flourished. We bought the colonial blue house in Westfield in our 8th year of marriage, my dream home on a beautiful corner lot that had once belonged to my grandmother. My grandmother had left me several acres of prime real estate when she died, including the corner lot where we eventually built our home. The inheritance came with an unusual stipulation. The land would belong exclusively to female descendants and could never be transferred to a spouse or male relative. My father, a real estate attorney, had helped set up the trust in a way that was ironclad. When David and I decided to build our home there, he didn't seem concerned about the arrangement. It's all the same in the end, he'd said dismissively when my father explained that David's name wouldn't be on the land deed. We're married. What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. Looking back, I should have noticed the small flashes of resentment that would appear and then quickly vanish from his expression whenever the subject of my land came up at family gatherings. The subtle way he would correct people or house, but technically Eliza's land, with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the years passed, something began to shift between us. Small fractures appeared in our foundation. David started working later, taking business trips that stretched from 2 days to 5, then from 5 days to 10. The calls home became shorter, the conversations more perfunctory. I told myself it was just a natural evolution of a marriage, the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed constant reassurance. Then came my mother's diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 3 months, but she was determined to fight for as long as she could. I flew to Arizona to be with her, planning to stay for 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month, then 2 months as her condition worsened but stabilized with treatment. David visited twice, both times for less than 48 hours. He was distracted, checking his phone constantly, making excuses about a big case that couldn't wait. I was too consumed with my mother's care to really register what was happening. When I called our home and a woman answered, then quickly hung up after I identified myself, David laughed it off. Probably the new cleaning service, he said. They don't speak much English. I believed him because I needed to believe him. Because my mother was dying and I couldn't handle another crisis. Because after 15 years, trust becomes a habit as much as a choice. Mom died on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I held her hand as she took her last breath, and then I sat there for hours, unable to move, unable to process that she was gone. When I finally called David to tell him, the call went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice breaking as I told him I'd be coming home the next day. He never called back. I arrived at our empty house 26 hours later. No David. No clothes in his closet. No toiletries in his bathroom. His office had been cleared out as well, personal items removed with surgical precision, leaving behind only the furniture and artwork that we'd chosen together. On the kitchen counter sat a manila envelope with my name typed on a label. Inside was a letter from David's law firm informing me that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that, per the terms of a post-nuptial agreement I had supposedly signed 3 years earlier, the house now belonged to David exclusively. I was being given 30 days to vacate the premises. The signature on the document looked like mine, but I had no memory of ever signing such an agreement. Later, I would learn about the digital manipulation software that could transfer signatures from one document to another, a technology that would be particularly accessible to someone at a prestigious law firm. I called David repeatedly. No answer. I called his office. His secretary informed me that he was unavailable indefinitely and directed me to speak with his attorney. I called his parents, who seemed genuinely shocked but offered no real help. His mother eventually admitted that David had told them we'd been having problems for years. News to me. It took 3 days of relentless searching and an embarrassing conversation with his colleague Trevor at a coffee shop to learn the truth. David had been having an affair with Cassandra Reeves, a junior associate at his firm, for nearly 2 years. And now they were living together in a rental while, according to Trevor, the house situation got sorted out. I was still reeling from this information when the locksmith arrived the following day, sent by David's attorney to change the locks. I refused to leave. The locksmith, uncomfortable with the situation, made an excuse and left, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. That night, I sat in my kitchen and tried to make sense of what was happening. My mother was dead. My husband had abandoned me. My home was being stolen through some kind of legal fraud. It was too much to process at once. And then the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a courier with another envelope. This one contained a court order granting David temporary occupancy of the house based on the disputed postnuptial agreement, pending further legal proceedings. I had 24 hours to remove my personal belongings. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the garden my grandmother had started and I had expanded, surrounded by the roses I'd planted for our anniversary, and tried to figure out what to do next. That's when I remembered the land deed, the unusual inheritance that had seemed like a quaint family tradition but now might be my only leverage. The next morning, before packing a single item, I drove to my father's house. Dad was nearly 80 now, his mind still sharp but his body failing him. He listened to my story with growing outrage, then disappeared into his home office. He returned with a locked metal box. "Your grandmother was wiser than any of us knew," he said, unlocking the box and removing a stack of legal documents. "The house may be in both your names with that questionable postnuptial agreement giving him control, but the land is yours alone. Always has been. Always will be." Dad explained that the land trust was set up with a special provision. If any structure built on the property was transferred out of my direct ownership without my explicit written consent, not just a signature, but a specific legal form filed with the county, then I had the unilateral right to reclaim the land for any purpose, including development. "He can have the house on paper," Dad said, his lawyer mind already turning. "But a house isn't much good if someone else owns the ground beneath it." I moved into a small apartment across town, watching from a distance as David and Cassandra moved into my house 2 weeks later. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I learned that he had given her the house as a grand romantic gesture. Apparently, he had told everyone who would listen that I had agreed to the divorce and property settlement because I wanted a fresh start after my mother's death. The narrative he created painted him as generous, her as innocent, and me as a willing participant who had moved on. None of it was true, but David had always been skilled at shaping reality to suit his needs. I consulted 3 different attorneys, all of whom confirmed that challenging the postnuptial agreement would be difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. The signature looked legitimate enough to create reasonable doubt, and David had covered his tracks well. But all three attorneys' eyes lit up when I mentioned the land trust. "This changes everything," said Patricia Winters, the third lawyer and the one I ultimately retained. "The house and the land are separate legal entities. Even if he somehow legally obtained the house through this questionable document, he had no right to transfer any interest in the land. And with this specific clause about development rights, well, let's just say Mr. Blake made a serious mistake. We decided to move carefully." Patricia advised me not to confront David directly or give any indication that I was planning to exercise my rights to the land. Instead, we would gather documentation, ensure all the trust paperwork was in order, and wait for the most opportune moment. That moment came sooner than expected. Through the Town Planning Commission's public notices, I learned that David had applied for permits to build an addition to the house, a sunroom extension off the back that would increase the footprint of the structure on my land. This action, taking place without any consultation with me as the landowner, was exactly the trigger we needed. Patricia filed an immediate injunction against the construction permit, which brought everything to a sudden halt and forced a revelation that shocked David, Cassandra, and apparently everyone at his law firm. The land beneath the colonial blue house belonged exclusively to me, had always belonged exclusively to me, and would continue to belong exclusively to me under terms that no court could easily overturn. The look on David's face when he was served with the injunction papers is something I will cherish forever. I made sure I was the one to deliver them, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy for legal purposes. He opened the door of my house wearing my husband's bathrobe. I noted distantly, and his expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to dawning horror as he scanned the documents. "You can't do this," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "The house is mine. We settled this." "The house might be yours on paper, David," I replied calmly. "But did you ever wonder who owns the ground it's sitting on?" He called me every name in the book that day, threatened lawsuits, restraining orders, criminal charges, whatever he could think of in his panic. The deputy eventually had to step between us, reminding David that making threats in front of law enforcement wasn't in his best interest. As I walked away, I heard Cassandra asking frantically what was happening. I didn't turn around to see his response. I didn't need to. The legal house of cards he had built was about to collapse, and we both knew it. What followed was 6 weeks of increasingly desperate legal maneuvering on David's part. His firm assigned their top real estate attorney to the case, not David himself, interestingly enough, and they tried everything from claiming adverse possession to arguing that the land trust was discriminatory and therefore invalid. None of it worked. My grandmother's lawyer had been extremely thorough, and my father's maintenance of the trust documentation over the years had been impeccable. The land was mine. The unusual development clause was enforceable, and David had triggered it by transferring the house to Cassandra without my explicit written consent. During this time, I received a surprising call from Trevor, David's colleague who had originally confirmed the affair. He wanted to meet for coffee again, and against my better judgment, I agreed. "You should know what's really going on," he said after we'd settled at a corner table. "David's been promising Cassandra that house for over a year. He told her he was going to leave you, that you were emotionally unstable, and that you'd agreed to give up the house as part of a quiet divorce settlement." I listened silently as Trevor detailed how David had manipulated not just me, but everyone around him. How he'd been embezzling from client accounts to fund a lifestyle beyond even his considerable salary. How the affair with Cassandra had begun when she caught him altering billing records, and he'd seduced her to ensure her silence. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Trevor looked down at his cup. "The firm is conducting an internal audit. Things are about to get very bad for David, and by extension, for Cassandra. I thought you should be prepared for what might come next. He'll be desperate. And desperate people do desperate things." He was right. 3 days later, I received a text message from David asking to meet and work things out like adults. I forwarded it to Patricia, who advised against any private meetings. Instead, she arranged a formal mediation session with both legal teams present. David arrived looking haggard, the polished attorney facade cracking under the strain. Cassandra wasn't with him, and the attorney representing him was from outside his firm, never a good sign. "I'm prepared to offer you a settlement," he began without preamble. "The house will be sold, and we'll split the proceeds 50-50. All I ask is that you sign an NDA covering the details of our separation." Patricia smiled thinly. "My client isn't interested in selling the house. As you're now aware, she owns the land outright, and under the terms of the trust, she has the right to develop that land for her own purposes now that you've triggered the transfer clause." David's new attorney looked confused. Clearly, David hadn't fully briefed him on the situation. "What exactly does your client want?" he asked Patricia. "My client," Patricia replied, "has entered into a preliminary agreement with Brightpath Construction. They're very interested in developing that particular corner lot for commercial purposes. The only obstacle is the current structure, which would need to be removed." The color drained from David's face. "You can't be serious. You'd tear down our home out of spite?" I looked him directly in the eyes for the first time since my world had collapsed. "It stopped being our home the moment you decided to give it to your mistress, David. And it's not spite, it's business. Brightpath has made a very generous offer for development rights." This wasn't entirely true. I had spoken with my old friend at Brightpath, and while they were interested, no formal agreement existed yet. But David didn't need to know that. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I removed a business card from my purse and slid it across the table. "Feel free to call them yourself. Ask for Michael Reeves in land acquisition." The name wasn't coincidental. Michael was Cassandra's older brother, though David had only met him once at a firm function and might not make the connection immediately. Michael had been more than happy to play along when I explained the situation, particularly once he learned how his sister had been manipulated. David stared at the card but didn't pick it up. "What do you want, Eliza?" "Really?" "I want exactly what the trust entitles me to," I replied evenly. "The land is mine to develop as I see fit. The structure currently occupying that land will need to be removed. You have 30 days to relocate the house at your expense, or it will be demolished as part of the new development project." "That's impossible. You can't just move a house," Patricia interjected smoothly. "Actually, it's quite possible. Expensive, certainly, but possible. Historic homes are relocated frequently. Of course, you would need a new plot of land to move it to all the necessary permits and a specialized moving company. Alternatively, you could dismantle it carefully and rebuild elsewhere. Again, expensive but possible." David's attorney, finally grasping the severity of the situation, requested a recess to confer with his client. As they left the room, I heard him hissing, "You didn't tell me about any land trust." When they returned 20 minutes later, David looked defeated. "What if I move out? What if I sign the house back over to you? Would you stop this development plan?" I pretended to consider this. "The development plans are quite advanced at this point. There would be financial penalties for backing out. I'll cover them," he said quickly. "Whatever they are." Patricia and I exchanged a look. This was better than we'd hoped for. "My client might consider pausing the development plans under certain conditions," Patricia said carefully. "Full restoration of the house to her ownership, financial compensation for the fraudulent transfer, coverage of all legal fees and potential development penalties, and a formal admission regarding the fabricated postnuptial agreement." David flinched at the last item but nodded. "I can agree to those terms." His attorney looked alarmed. "We should discuss the details privately before." "No," David cut him off. "Draw up the paperwork. I want this done today." 2 days later, I watched from the driveway as David and Cassandra loaded the last of their belongings into a moving truck. Neither of them looked in my direction as they pulled away from the colonial blue house with the white trim. My house, on my land, returned to me through a settlement agreement that included a substantial development cancellation fee that David had paid directly to me. The settlement didn't erase the pain of betrayal or the grief of losing my mother, but it did provide a measure of justice that felt deeply satisfying. David's admission about forging my signature on the postnuptial agreement had been forwarded to the State Bar Association and his former firm. His legal career was effectively over. As for Cassandra, Michael had told me she'd finally seen David for who he truly was once the extent of his deception became clear. She was cooperating with the firm's investigation into the financial improprieties Trevor had mentioned. Standing in my garden again, I bent down to touch the roses I had planted years ago. They had been neglected during my absence but were still alive, still fighting to bloom. They just needed some care and attention to thrive again. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Dinner next week to celebrate? The whole Reeves family wants to thank you for opening our eyes about David. I smiled as I responded affirmatively. From unexpected corners, new friendships had emerged from this ordeal. Patricia had introduced me to several women in similar situations, forming a support network I never knew I needed. Trevor had connected me with clients looking for architectural consultations, helping me rebuild my business. Most surprisingly, Cassandra herself had sent me a handwritten letter of apology, explaining that David had convinced her I knew about their relationship and had given my blessing as part of our amicable separation. She'd been as deceived as I had been, in her own way. I didn't respond to her letter, but I didn't burn it either. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others. That evening, I sat on the porch swing with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink over my land, my house. I thought about Grandma Rose and her insistence that I maintain sole ownership of this piece of earth. Always keep something that's just yours, she had said. In her wisdom, she had created not just an inheritance but a safety net that caught me when everything else fell away. The foundation beneath my feet was solid again. The ground I stood on was mine. And from this foundation, I would rebuild stronger, wiser, and with boundaries that no one would ever cross again. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in destruction, but in reclamation. In taking back what's yours and standing firm on ground that no one can take from you. Not with manipulation, not with legal maneuvering, not with betrayal. David had forgotten one crucial detail in his rush to build a new life. The ground we stand on matters. The foundations we build upon matter. And in the end, it was the land, my land, that had saved me. As night fell over my reclaimed home, I felt Grandma Rose's presence in the gentle evening breeze. I whispered a thank you to her for the foresight that had become my salvation, for teaching me that sometimes the greatest strength lies in holding on to what's rightfully yours, especially when someone tries to take it away. In the morning, I would call a contractor about repairs to the roof and repaving the driveway. I would meet with my business partner about expanding our architectural firm. I would plant new roses alongside the old, creating a garden that honored both the past and the future. For now, though, I simply sat in the quiet victory of this moment. On my porch, at my house, on my land. Reclaimed, restored, mine.